Hello everyone, and welcome to my Beyond the Gates official channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. June never imagined that the quiet, almost accidental moments would be the ones that change her life forever. Yet there she was, standing beneath the soft amber glow of the Fairmont Crest courtyard lights, listening to Martin's steady voice as he spoke not with grand promises or seductive bravado, but with a warmth so genuine it disarmed every defense she had spent years building. And for a woman like June, who had survived betrayal, disappointment, and the constant pressure of living up to expectations, kindness was more intoxicating than any charm. Even though Martin possessed both in abundance, the kind of charm that didn't demand attention but earned it effortlessly, the kind of kindness that lingered long after words were spoken. And as he offered her his jacket that evening, noticing without her saying a word that she was cold, something inside June shifted, because no one had noticed her like that in a very long time. And as they talked about trivial things, childhood memories, favorite late-night diners, the absurdity of Fairmont Crest's endless social politics, June felt herself laughing freely, a sound she barely recognized anymore, while Martin watched her with a quiet admiration that felt safe rather than invasive. And though June reminded herself repeatedly that she shouldn't get close, that her life was already complicated enough, that Martin came with his own past and unspoken complications, she couldn't ignore how he listened when she spoke, how he never interrupted, how he remembered details she casually mentioned days before. And it was in those small moments that June began to realize she was already losing the internal battle she pretended she hadn't noticed had begun. Rumors, of course, didn't take long to surface in Fairmont Crest, where secrets were currency and whispers traveled faster than truth. And when June and Martin were spotted together more than once, coffee at dawn, a late-night walk after a charity gala, lingering conversations that stretched far beyond politeness, eyes followed them, judgments formed, and questions arose about whether June was forgetting her past or recklessly repeating it. Yet none of that mattered when Martin showed up unexpectedly at her door one rainy evening after learning she'd had a terrible day, not to fix anything or demand explanations, but simply to sit with her in silence, handing her a cup of tea and letting her cry without embarrassment or pressure. And in that moment, June's carefully constructed walls cracked completely, because no one had ever given her permission to be vulnerable without consequence. Their connection deepened quietly, intensely, built on shared confessions and mutual respect rather than impulsive passion. Yet the tension between them grew undeniable, especially as Martin revealed fragments of his own past, regrets he carried, mistakes he owned, people he'd hurt and lessons he'd learned. And June saw not a perfect man, but a sincere one. Someone who had faced his flaws and chosen to grow, and that authenticity drew her closer than she ever intended, until one night, after a particularly emotional conversation about second chances and whether people truly deserve them, June found herself reaching for Martin's hand, not out of desire but out of trust. And when he squeezed it gently, asking if she was sure, she realized with startling clarity that she was choosing him, fully aware of the risks, because for the first time in years, her heart felt alive rather than guarded. Their first kiss was not explosive or rushed but tender and hesitant, charged with unspoken understanding. And as it happened, neither noticed the shadow watching from a distance, a figure who would later fuel scandal and suspicion, twisting the narrative into something darker than the truth. Because in Fairmont Crest, happiness rarely went unpunished. And soon June found herself confronting backlash she hadn't anticipated: friends questioning her judgment, enemies using her vulnerability as leverage, and whispers suggesting Martin's kindness was nothing more than manipulation. Yet Martin never wavered, standing beside her publicly and privately, refusing to let lies define them, even when old wounds reopened and June's fears resurfaced, threatening to pull her back into isolation. Still, doubt crept in when pieces of Martin's past emerged unexpectedly, forcing June to question whether she truly knew everything. And in a heart-wrenching confrontation that left both of them shaken, Martin confessed a truth he'd been afraid to share, a mistake that could cost June everything if she stayed. And as she walked away that night, Torn between self-preservation and love, the entire Fairmont Crest community held its breath, knowing this wasn't just a romance, but a turning point that would ripple through every relationship connected to them. And in the days that followed, June wrestled with herself, replaying every moment, every gesture of kindness, every look that had made her feel seen, until she realized that running from love because of fear was its own kind of betrayal. And when she finally returned to Martin, not with blind faith but with cautious hope, she made it clear that forgiveness would not be easy, that trust would need rebuilding, and that love, if it was to survive, would have to be honest and equal. And Martin accepted her terms without hesitation, proving once again that his kindness was not an act but a choice one. He made every day, even as new threats loomed on the horizon, enemies sharpened their knives, and past secrets prepared to explode, because June and Martin's story was no longer just about attraction. It was about redemption, resilience, and the courage to choose connection in a world determined to tear it apart, setting the stage for future betrayals, unexpected alliances, and emotional reckonings that would test whether kindness truly could survive in Fairmont Crest, or whether love, once again, would become collateral damage beyond the gates. The days following June's decision to return to Martin unfolded with a fragile calm that felt almost deceptive, as though Fairmont Crest itself were pausing before unleashing the next storm. And June quickly learned that choosing Martin did not silence the whispers but amplified them. Because now every glance they shared, every quiet smile, every moment of closeness became fodder for speculation. And while June tried to hold her head high, pretending the judgment didn't sting, it was Martin's steady presence that anchored her. The way he reached for her hand in public without hesitation, the way he defended her when barbed comments slipped too casually from familiar mouths, and the way he never asked her to explain herself to anyone, insisting instead that their truth was enough. Yet peace was short-lived when an unexpected revelation surfaced at a Fairmont Crest board luncheon, where a seemingly harmless conversation turned volatile as a former associate of Martin's casually dropped a reference to a past scandal, one that implicated Martin in a decision that had destroyed a family and left lasting scars. And the room fell silent as eyes shifted to June, waiting for her reaction, testing her resolve. And although her chest tightened with humiliation and anger, June surprised everyone, including herself, by calmly standing beside Martin, acknowledging the past without excusing it, and reminding the room that growth was not only possible but necessary, a moment that earned quiet admiration from some and deeper resentment from others, particularly those who thrived on moral superiority and social dominance. However, the true test came later that night, when June finally allowed herself to unravel in private, questioning whether love required enduring constant scrutiny, whether kindness could truly outweigh consequence, and whether Martin's past would forever shadow their future. But instead of offering reassurances or empty promises, Martin chose honesty, admitting his fear that one day June would realize she deserved an easier life, a simpler love. And it was in that vulnerable exchange that June understood something fundamental, that Martin wasn't trying to win her or possess her. He was simply standing with her, ready to face whatever came next, together or apart. And that choice, that freedom, bound her to him more deeply than any declaration ever could. As weeks passed, their relationship evolved under pressure, forging intimacy through adversity rather than fantasy. And yet temptation, jealousy, and doubt crept in through unexpected channels, including an old flame of June's who resurfaced with convenient timing and unresolved feelings, subtly challenging Martin's place in her life. Stirring insecurity he struggled to hide, and while Martin never accused June or demanded reassurance, his quiet withdrawal spoke volumes, forcing June to confront how easily trust could fracture. When fear went unspoken, leading to a raw confrontation that ended not in shouting but in tears, confessions, and a shared realization that love demanded continual effort, not just emotional bravery. Meanwhile, unseen forces continued to manipulate events behind the scenes, twisting moments of tenderness into perceived betrayals, planting evidence designed to fracture what June and Martin had built. And when June was presented with proof, photographs, messages, timelines, that suggested Martin had been dishonest again. The ground beneath her collapsed, reopening wounds she thought had healed, and this time, walking away felt less like fear and more like survival, leaving Martin devastated, watching helplessly as June distanced herself to protect her heart. Yet fate intervened when the truth emerged through an unlikely ally, exposing the deception and revealing just how threatened others were by the strength of June and Martin's bond. And when June confronted Martin with the truth in hand, the reunion was bittersweet, filled with relief, but also a sobering awareness that their love would always exist under siege. Still, June chose to stay, not because Martin was perfect, but because he was real, because his kindness never faltered even when he was misunderstood, because his charm was rooted in empathy rather than ego, and because with him, she felt not rescued, but respected. And as Fairmont Crest prepared for its next social spectacle, a gala destined to explode with secrets and shifting alliances, June and Martin stood together, knowing that whatever came next would test them again, but also knowing that for the first time in a very long time, love wasn't something June was running toward blindly or fleeing from in fear. It was something she was choosing with open eyes, fully aware that beyond the gates, kindness was rare, love was dangerous, and courage was the only way forward. As the Fairmont Crest Gala drew closer, tension thickened the air like an unspoken promise of chaos, and June felt it in every step she took beside Martin, aware that their unity itself had become a provocation, because in this world, love that survived scrutiny was considered a threat, and though Martin continued to offer her the same gentle steadiness, checking in with her before meetings, leaving handwritten notes where only she would find them, grounding her with quiet reassurances that never felt rehearsed, June sensed the storm building, especially as familiar faces began aligning themselves into factions, some offering sudden kindness that rang hollow, others sharpening old grudges into new weapons, and it became painfully clear that the gala was not about charity or celebration at all, but about power, exposure, and control, a stage designed to test who would stand and who would fall. On the night itself, June arrived in a composed elegance that masked the emotional armor she had been forced to develop, while Martin stood at her side not as a shield, but as a partner, his presence steady yet unobtrusive, and as they moved through the crowd, exchanging polite smiles and measured words, June couldn't help but notice how eyes lingered on them longer than necessary, how conversations hushed when they passed, how anticipation simmered just beneath the surface, until the evening's carefully curated harmony shattered, when an unscheduled speech turned into a calculated ambush. Secrets weaponized under the guise of truth, accusations flung with practiced precision, and once again Martin's past was dragged into the spotlight, this time intertwined with June's reputation, threatening to dismantle everything she had worked to rebuild, and for a moment, the room waited for June to falter, to retreat, to confirm every assumption made about her vulnerability, but instead she did something unexpected. She spoke, not defensively or desperately, but with clarity and conviction, acknowledging mistakes, rejecting manipulation, and asserting that love rooted in kindness was not a weakness, but a deliberate act of courage, and as murmurs rippled through the crowd, June felt Martin's hand tighten around hers, not to restrain her, but to steady himself, because in that moment, it was he who drew strength from her. The fallout was immediate and far-reaching, alliances fractured, reputations shifted, and while some applauded June's resolve, others doubled down on their vendettas, ensuring that consequences would follow long after the lights dimmed. Yet amid the wreckage, June and Martin found themselves retreating to the quiet of her living room later that night, the adrenaline fading into vulnerability, and it was there, surrounded by the remnants of a battle neither had sought, that Martin finally allowed his own fears to surface, admitting that no matter how strong their bond felt, he worried that loving him meant endless defense for June, a life spent proving rather than simply living, and June listened, truly listened, before responding with a truth of her own, that kindness, real kindness, was never passive, that choosing him wasn't about saving or sacrificing, but about meeting someone where they were and deciding together where to go next. And for the first time since their journey began, they spoke not about survival but about the future, tentative yet hopeful plans shaped by mutual respect rather than expectation. Still, Fairmont Crest was not finished with them, and as new players emerged from the shadows, each with their own motives, histories, and grudges, June understood that her relationship with Martin had become a catalyst for change far beyond romance, challenging long-held hierarchies and exposing the fragile foundations beneath polished facades. And though the road ahead promised betrayal, temptation, and painful choices, June no longer feared the uncertainty, because with Martin, she had learned that charm could open doors but kindness sustained what lay beyond them, and whatever storms awaited, she was no longer facing them alone, setting the stage for deeper reckonings, irreversible decisions, and a love that would continue to test whether compassion could truly endure. In a world built on control, ambition, and secrets beyond the gates, in the aftermath of the gala, Fairmont Crest did not simply return to its carefully manicured routine, because the truth June had spoken aloud lingered like a fault line beneath every polished interaction, and as days passed, subtle shifts became impossible to ignore. With longtime power players suddenly scrambling to protect their influence, while quieter figures found unexpected courage in June's example, and through it all, Martin remained unwavering, his kindness no longer just a personal trait, but a quiet rebellion against the culture of manipulation surrounding them, and yet that very consistency became its own test when June began to notice the toll it took on him. The late nights spent replaying conversations, the wait in his silence when he believed he was alone, and the unspoken fear that no matter how much good he tried to do, his past would always be used as a weapon against the woman he loved. And it was during one such moment, when June found him sitting alone in the courtyard where their story had first shifted, that she realized love was no longer just about choosing each other in moments of strength, but standing firm in moments of doubt. And as she joined him, reminding him not with reassurances, but with presence that he was not defined by who he had been, Martin finally allowed himself to lean into that support, admitting that June's belief in him had forced him to confront parts of himself he'd long avoided, parts shaped by regret and self-punishment, and in doing so, their bond deepened into something steadier, less fragile, though no less vulnerable. Meanwhile, new tensions emerged when an investigation into past dealings connected to Martin threatened to reopen wounds across multiple families in Fairmont Crest, placing June in an impossible position as allies pressured her to distance herself for the sake of appearances, and while she initially resisted, the strain of constant defense began to erode her confidence, making her question whether love, no matter how genuine, could coexist with a life perpetually under siege. And when she voiced those fears to Martin, expecting disappointment or anger, he surprised her by offering space rather than resistance, telling her that her happiness mattered more to him than his pride, a gesture so selfless it nearly broke her, because in that moment she understood that Martin's charm had never been about persuasion and his kindness had never been conditional. It had always been about choice, and she chose him again, not out of defiance but clarity. As the investigation intensified, truths long buried surfaced with explosive consequences, exposing hypocrisy among Fairmont Crest's elite and forcing public reckonings that reshaped alliances overnight. And through every revelation, June and Martin stood together not as a united front against enemies, but as two people committed to honesty even when it hurt, even when it cost them. And when the dust finally began to settle, what remained was not triumph, but transformation. As June realized she was no longer the woman who hid behind caution, nor the one who chased validation, and Martin was no longer the man running from his past, but someone willing to be fully seen. And though their future remained uncertain, marked by challenges yet to come, one truth had become undeniable. June hadn't fallen for Martin because he dazzled her or rescued her. She had fallen because his kindness invited her to be herself without fear. And in a place like Fairmont Crest, where love was often transactional and vulnerability was punished, that choice became the most radical act of all, ensuring that whatever storms lay ahead, their story would continue to ripple outward, changing not just their lives, but the very balance of power beyond the gates. As the weeks turned into months, The quiet transformation that June and Martin had sparked within Fairmont Crest continued to unfold in unexpected ways, because change in a place built on tradition never arrived loudly. It seeped in through cracks, through altered loyalties and softened stances. And while some residents resisted fiercely, clinging to old hierarchies and long-held resentments, others found themselves drawn to the authenticity June and Martin represented, even if they refused to admit it aloud. And June felt the weight of that attention more acutely than ever, aware that her choices were no longer just personal but symbolic, a reality that sometimes left her longing for the simplicity she once believed love was supposed to offer, yet whenever doubt threatened to overwhelm her, Martin remained her constant, not by insisting everything would be fine, but by acknowledging the fear alongside her, reminding her that courage wasn't the absence of uncertainty, but the willingness to move forward despite it. And it was during one such moment of shared vulnerability that June realized how deeply her life had shifted, because she no longer measured her worth through approval or stability alone. She measured it through honesty, through the quiet strength she found in choosing what felt right even when it felt difficult. Still, Fairmont Crest was not done testing them, and when an unexpected crisis erupted, one that placed Martin at the center of a moral dilemma with far-reaching consequences, June was forced to confront the limits of her trust in ways she hadn't anticipated, as Martin faced pressure to protect influential figures by remaining silent about truths that could dismantle reputations and upend families. And while his instinct toward kindness urged him to minimize harm, June challenged him to consider the cost of silence, sparking a conflict between them that was both painful and necessary, because for the first time, they stood on opposing sides of a choice that could redefine their future, and the tension that followed was heavy, marked not by raised voices but by distance, by unsent messages and sleepless nights, until Martin finally made a decision that shocked everyone, including June, choosing transparency over protection, truth over convenience, even knowing it could destroy what remained of his standing in Fairmont Crest. And when the fallout hit, swift and unforgiving, it was June who stood publicly beside him once more, not out of obligation but conviction, because she saw in his choice the same courage she had learned to claim for herself. The consequences were severe: friendships severed, doors closed, and opportunities withdrawn, and for a moment, it seemed as though love had demanded too much, that kindness had cost them everything. Yet in the quiet aftermath, stripped of illusion and social safety, June and Martin discovered a deeper peace, a freedom rooted not in status, but in alignment. And as they rebuilt their lives beyond the expectations of Fairmont Crest, they found strength in simplicity, shared mornings, honest conversations, and the knowledge that what they had chosen could not be taken from them by rumor or retaliation. And though the gates of Fairmont Crest still loomed large, symbolic of a world they could never fully escape, June understood now that love was not about resisting temptation or avoiding pain. It was about choosing connection with open eyes and an open heart, and Martin's charm had not swept her away so much as his kindness had invited her to stand beside him as an equal, and together, they walked forward into an uncertain future, not because it promised happiness without struggle, but because it offered something far rarer: truth, growth, and the courage to love beyond the gates.